The late afternoon sun glistened on the still waters of the pool at the Magnolia Creek Residences, a serene apartment complex in Austin, Texas. Jordan, a 32-year-old software engineer, leaned back on a poolside lounger, enjoying a rare moment of calm his demanding work life seldom allowed. He'd just completed a major project and decided to treat himself to some downtime with a good book and the occasional sip of ice-cold lemonade. The scene was peaceful, almost idyllic, until the sound of footsteps disrupted the quiet. He glanced up from his book and saw a woman in her mid-50s, with meticulously styled blonde hair, oversized sunglasses, and an air of self-importance that preceded her. Jordan had seen her around the complex before, but they'd never exchanged words. The woman walked directly toward him, her face a mix of confusion and suspicion. At first, Jordan thought she might need help, but her expression quickly erased any notion of goodwill. "Excuse me," she said, her tone sharp. "Do you live here?" Jordan paused, taken aback by the bluntness of the question. "Yes, I do," he replied evenly, sitting up straighter. "Really?" she pressed, narrowing her eyes. "Because I've never seen you before. Are you sure you're not visiting someone?" Jordan felt the subtle sting of her insinuation, but maintained his composure. "I'm sure. Apartment 304. I've been here for 2 years." Her lips pursed, as though the answer wasn't satisfactory. "If that's true, then you should have your key card. Let's see it." The demand was jarring. Jordan could feel his chest tighten as he weighed his response. He wasn't about to let her dictate his afternoon. "I'm not obligated to show you anything," he said, keeping his voice calm. "If you have an issue, feel free to contact management." Her face flushed with indignation. "I will. I'm going to call security right now," she snapped, pulling her phone from her bag. Jordan sighed, leaning back into his chair. He wasn't in the mood for drama, but it seemed like he didn't have a choice. A few other residents lounging by the pool began to notice the commotion. Some exchanged glances, while others subtly pulled out their phones. The tension in the air grew thicker with each passing second. Jordan kept his gaze steady, refusing to let her rattle him. He wasn't doing anything wrong, and he knew it. As the woman stepped aside to make her call, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear, Jordan couldn't help but wonder how far she'd take this. The growing attention from other residents set the stage for what would soon become a confrontation neither Jordan nor the onlookers would forget. The woman's voice carried across the pool area as she spoke into her phone, her words dripping with self-righteous authority. "Yes, I'm at the pool, and there's someone here who shouldn't be. No, he says he lives here, but I've never seen him before. I need someone to come down immediately." Jordan could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on him. The onlookers weren't just watching, they were processing. Some seemed uncomfortable, others curious, and a few openly disapproving. A young couple sitting on the far side exchanged whispers, and an older man in swim trunks shook his head slightly. Still, no one intervened. The woman, emboldened by the lack of interruption, turned back to Jordan. "You could have avoided all this if you'd just shown me your key card," she said, folding her arms as if she'd won a battle. Jordan looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I don't owe you anything," he said simply. His calm response seemed to infuriate her further. "People like you think you can do whatever you want," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for him and the closest bystanders to hear. Jordan's jaw clenched. He wasn't naive. He understood exactly what she meant by people like you. But he refused to let her bait him into an argument. Instead, he shifted his gaze back to his book, flipping a page as if her words were nothing more than background noise. Minutes later, a uniformed security guard appeared at the entrance to the pool area. He was young, probably in his mid-20s, with a look of uncertainty on his face as he surveyed the scene. The woman waved him over enthusiastically, her expression triumphant. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," she exclaimed, gesturing toward Jordan. "This man refuses to leave. He claims he lives here, but I'm certain he doesn't. He wouldn't even show me his key card." The guard approached Jordan, who set his book down and stood up, towering over both the woman and the guard. "I do live here," Jordan said, his voice steady but firm. "Apartment 304. You can check with management if you need to." The guard hesitated, glancing between Jordan and the woman. "Sir, do you have your key card with you?" Jordan reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He flipped it open, revealing not just his key card, but also his driver's license. which displayed the same address as the complex. "Here you go," Jordan said, holding it up for the guard to inspect. The guard nodded, his face flushing slightly. "That checks out," he said, handing it back. "Sorry for the trouble, sir." The woman's face twisted in disbelief. "Wait, you're just going to take his word for it?" she demanded. The guard straightened. "Ma'am, he provided the necessary proof. There's nothing else to discuss." The crowd, which had been silently observing until now, began to stir. A few people murmured to each other, and the young couple from earlier gave Jordan a small nod of approval. But before the situation could diffuse completely, a voice rang out from the other side of the pool. "Enough is enough." The unexpected interjection turned all heads toward a new figure, a neighbor stepping forward to reveal a history that would change the course of the confrontation entirely. The voice belonged to an older woman, perhaps in her late 60s, who had been quietly watching the entire spectacle from her poolside chair. Dressed in a floral sundress and wide-brimmed hat, she stood with a confidence that demanded attention. Her name was Eleanor, a long-time resident of Magnolia Creek, and someone known for her no-nonsense demeanor. "Excuse me," Eleanor said firmly as she walked toward the small crowd, "but this isn't the first time this has happened, and I think it's about time someone said something." The woman accusing Jordan spun around, clearly caught off guard. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about," she said defensively. "Oh, don't play coy," Eleanor shot back, her voice sharp enough to cut through the tension. "You've been harassing people in this complex for months, and we're all tired of it. Just last week, you accused the delivery driver of loitering because he was taking a lunch break in his truck, and let's not forget the time you called the cops on the college kids moving into their apartment because they looked suspicious." The accusing woman's face reddened, and she opened her mouth to protest, but Eleanor wasn't finished. "And now this calling security on a man who's done nothing wrong just because you don't recognize him. You're embarrassing yourself." A ripple of murmurs spread through the onlookers. Some nodded in agreement, while others looked visibly uncomfortable. The attention was no longer on Jordan. It was squarely on the woman who had instigated the confrontation. The security guard, clearly out of his depth, shifted uncomfortably, but didn't intervene. Jordan, for his part, remained silent, letting Eleanor take the reins. He could feel the tide turning, and it was a relief to see someone else standing up to the blatant injustice. "Do you even know how ridiculous you look right now?" Eleanor continued, her tone softening just enough to land the point with clarity. "We're supposed to be a community here. Treating people like they don't belong just because they don't fit your narrow idea of who belongs, that's not how we do things." For a moment, there was silence. Then someone clapped. It started slow, but grew as more people joined in. The sound seemed to shake the accusing woman, who now looked small and unsure of herself. "This is absurd," she muttered, but the conviction in her voice was gone. She turned on her heel, gathering her things in a flurry of embarrassment, and marched out of the pool area. Eleanor turned back to Jordan, her expression softening. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," she said. "It's not right, and it's not fair." Jordan offered a small smile. "Thank you. I appreciate that." As Eleanor returned to her seat, the crowd began to disperse, but the energy in the air lingered. The incident wasn't over, not yet. Someone had been recording the entire event, and the video was already making its way to social media. What started as a quiet confrontation was about to explode into something far bigger, as the world outside Magnolia Creek took notice of what had just happened. By the time the pool area cleared out, a single recording from the incident had already begun circulating online. A younger resident named Lucas had uploaded the video to his social media with a simple caption, "This just happened at Magnolia Creek. When will this stop?" The clip showed everything the accusatory woman's demands, Jordan's calm demeanor, Eleanor's impassioned call-out, and the applause that followed. It didn't take long for the video to gain traction. Back at his apartment, Jordan sat on his couch, still processing the events of the day. His phone buzzed incessantly. Friends and co-workers were tagging him in the video, expressing their support and disbelief. He hadn't anticipated how quickly things would escalate beyond the pool. Meanwhile, in the leasing office, the property manager, Miss Delgado, had just been made aware of the situation. She scrolled through the video on her phone, her expression growing more serious with each passing second. It wasn't the first time complaints had been lodged against the woman in question, whose name, as it turned out, was Deborah, but this time there was undeniable proof. Miss Delgado decided it was time to act. She called a meeting with both Deborah and Jordan for the following morning. Jordan, though reluctant to relive the ordeal, agreed. He wanted closure not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been on the receiving end of such behavior. The next morning, the leasing office conference room was tense as the three sat across from each other. Deborah looked far less confident than she had the day before. She avoided eye contact with Jordan, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her purse. Miss Delgado wasted no time getting to the point. "I've reviewed the footage," she began, her voice measured but firm. "Deborah, this behavior is unacceptable. You have a pattern of targeting residents and visitors based on assumptions that have no merit. This is harassment, plain and simple." Deborah sputtered. "I was just trying to keep the community safe. How was I supposed to know he lived here?" Miss Delgado's gaze didn't waver. "It's not your job to police who belongs here. That's why we have security and a management team. Your actions have caused unnecessary distress to Mr. Hall and other residents. As of today, you are receiving an official warning. Any further complaints of this nature will result in the termination of your lease." Jordan remained silent, watching as Deborah's face flushed with embarrassment. She tried to protest, but quickly realized she was out of arguments. Finally, she muttered, "Fine," and stormed out of the room. Miss Delgado turned to Jordan, her tone softening. "I'm truly sorry this happened. If there's anything else we can do to support you, please let me know." Jordan nodded. "I appreciate that. Thank you." As he left the office, Jordan felt a mix of emotions: relief, vindication, and a lingering sadness that such an incident had to happen in the first place. But the day's revelations weren't over. By the evening, the video had gone viral. News outlets picked it up, and hashtags like #Jordan Hall and #CalOutKaren trended across platforms. The internet erupted with conversations about accountability, prejudice, and the importance of standing up against injustice. Strangers reached out to Jordan, sharing their own experiences and thanking him for handling the situation with dignity. What had started as a personal ordeal now carried a global weight, sparking debates and conversations that extended far beyond Magnolia Creek. By the next morning, the video had amassed millions of views. It was everywhere on social media platforms, morning news programs, and even major talk shows, discussing the broader implications of racial profiling and accountability. Jordan's name and face became the center of a national conversation, something he hadn't asked for, but knew he couldn't ignore. He woke up to an inbox overflowing with messages. There were strangers thanking him for his composure, sharing how his actions inspired them to confront injustice in their own lives. Activists reached out, offering their platforms to amplify his voice. Even brands and organizations sent emails, asking if he'd like to collaborate or speak at events about his experience. Still, not all the responses were positive. Amid the flood of support, there were detractors, people accusing him of overreacting, of turning a simple misunderstanding into a spectacle. Jordan, though, didn't let the negativity faze him. He understood the bigger picture. The incident wasn't just about him. It was about a pervasive issue that needed addressing, and his story had struck a chord. Meanwhile, the fallout for Deborah was swift and public. Someone from the complex anonymously shared more accounts of her behavior, adding fuel to the fire. Her name trended alongside Jordan's, and while some sympathized with her embarrassment, most condemned her actions. Calls for accountability grew louder, with some suggesting she attend anti-bias training or even face legal repercussions for harassment. Back at Magnolia Creek, the ripple effects of the incident were palpable. Residents who had once stayed silent began to speak up about their experiences, forming a community dialogue about creating a more inclusive environment. Miss Delgado took the feedback seriously, organizing workshops and panels on unconscious bias and community building. The complex, which at once felt fractured by unspoken tensions, began to transform into a place of understanding and connection. For Jordan, the whirlwind of attention brought unexpected opportunities. He was invited to share his story on a prominent talk show, where he spoke candidly about the importance of staying calm in the face of injustice and the value of allyship. "It's not just about calling out bad behavior," he said during the interview. "It's about creating spaces where everyone feels they belong, where no one has to prove they have a right to exist." The interview went viral too, further solidifying Jordan as a symbol of resilience and grace under pressure. But for him, the true reward came closer to home. Neighbors he'd barely spoken to before started greeting him warmly in the hallways, offering kind words and genuine smiles. Eleanor, the neighbor who had stood up for him, became a regular visitor to his apartment, often bringing over baked goods and stories from her long life. As the dust settled, the incident became a catalyst for change, not just at Magnolia Creek, but in the broader conversation about how we treat one another. Stories like Magnolia Creek's remind us that standing up against prejudice isn't just about confrontation. It's about building bridges, creating dialogue, and fostering spaces where everyone feels safe and valued. Small actions can lead to big changes, but it all starts with the courage to say, "This isn't right." If this story resonated with you, let's keep the conversation going. Share your thoughts, your experiences, and your ideas for creating a more inclusive world. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire, challenge, and bring us closer together.